They called it a blessing when Lady Mariette of Warville was chosen to marry the heir of House Giselhart, a union meant to join two fractured kingdoms and silence 100 years of war. She was 15, with hair like candle flame and a gaze so pure the priests called her an angel sent to heal their cursed bloodline. But behind the prayers and festival bells, behind the gilded carriages and the perfumed sheets, lurked truths no one dared speak aloud. For in these lands, the wedding night was more than celebration. It was a test, a ritual, a grim ritual where girlhood was torn away beneath the weight of royal expectation. Mariette knew little of men, and less still of what happened behind a locked bedchamber door. No woman had taught her, save for cryptic warnings whispered by old midwives who feared the lash for speaking plainly. They told her only to pray, to stay still, to submit, as if those words could ward off death itself. Yet death waited all the same. The halls of Giselhart were draped in wedding silks and banners of blood red, a color meant to symbolize life, but which only reminded Mariette of spilled hearts on a battlefield. When the feast ended and the last honeyed wine was poured, they led her to a chamber lit with 100 candles, their flames shivering as if they too feared what came next. Her groom was a prince, trained for war, but not for tenderness, taught that a wife was a vessel to break and sheep to his will. No one told him of softness, of patience, of the wounds a woman could bear hidden beneath her skin. His father had warned him not to fail, not to leave the sheets unmarked, for the kingdom would measure his power in the blood of his bride. The ceremony demanded proof, a dark echo of old pagan rites buried beneath the weight of Christian blessing. So he approached her with a mind sharpened like a sword, and she, trembling, did not know how to speak the fear that strangled her heart. Their bodies met in a confusion of pain and urgency, his hands too rough, her flesh too unprepared, and when she cried out, no one came to help her. No one had explained how a girl so small could break from within, how the tearing of her body might call forth a river of blood too wild to be stopped. Mariette's breath grew ragged, each heartbeat a hammer pounding against the walls of her chest, until she felt the world slipping sideways. Infection was a specter no healer could truly banish. The blades used to cut cloth, to trim candles, to cleanse the wedding sheets were never clean enough, and in the hours that followed, filth found its way into her torn skin, carrying fever like a hidden dagger. By morning she was pale as winter milk, her lips cracked and eyes wild with a heat no water could quench. The priests muttered that God was testing her, that she must have sinned to suffer so. They anointed her brow with sacred oil, but her body shook until her bones rattled against each other, and the red of the wedding sheets seemed to laugh at their prayers. The prince stood by, dumbfounded, hands still marked with her blood, unable to name the horror he had sown. In that place and time, a woman's death was as ordinary as a swallow returning to its nest, but somehow Mariette's seemed crueler, for she had been the promise of peace, the dove meant to heal war. Within 3 days she was gone, flesh rotting from within while the servants pretended she would recover. The midwives refused to speak of what they saw, for the truth was too ugly for the world to bear, that ignorance had killed her, that no monster had needed to slip through the window, no poison had been stirred in her cup. Only a prince who knew nothing of a woman's body, only a world that prized the stain of blood on linen more than the beating of a girl's heart. As they carried her to the family tomb, candles guttered in the corridors, and the smell of rot settled over the household. The alliance she was meant to cement broke apart within weeks, the king blaming the girl's family cursing the Giselharts, until war returned to the valleys more savage than before. The priests called her a martyr, but no saint appeared to carry her spirit beyond the veil, only silence, only the hush of stone. In the years that followed, other brides met the same fate, girls wed to boys who were told nothing of gentleness, only the cold arithmetic of consummation, only the need to show power, to claim their bride like a war prize. Some bled out within hours, their wombs torn beyond mending, while others succumbed days later to fevers that devoured them from the inside. And each time the same lie was whispered, that God's will had chosen them, that they were weak, that they could not bear the burden of a queen. Never did they speak of knives that cut them open, nor hands that crushed them, nor ignorance so absolute it might as well have been a demon. In painted halls and silver mirrors, these girls were remembered as gentle lambs, doomed to die so peace might live. But the peace never came, the candles burned down, the families feuded, and blood soaked the earth again, as though their lives had been given for nothing. And still the old rites endured, the same chamber, the same silks, the same red banners. No one changed, no one dared. And beyond the stone walls of 1,000 keeps another girl was being fitted for her wedding dress, her hands folded in prayer, never knowing she was walking to her own grave, her heart beating like a moth against glass, too small, too fragile to survive a prince's cruel embrace. In another kingdom, another name, the same fate awaited. They called her Isabel, child of a minor count whose lands had been starved by war and taxes until nothing but ash and ragged banners remained. To save his house, her father promised her to Lord Brennick, a knight grown rich on battle spoils, a man who had never known tenderness. Isabel was 13 when they braided her hair with gold thread and told her she would save them all. They taught her to curtsy, to smile, to hold her breath so her ribs would seem delicate, as though even the air itself might break her. But no one taught her what truly waited behind the wedding doors. Lord Brennick's castle was a place of shadows and echoes, built from red stone that seemed to bleed when it rained. The servants looked away when Isabel passed, pity in their eyes, for they had seen too many child brides carried through those gates and far fewer carried back out again. On the night of her wedding, they dressed her in silk, so heavy she could barely walk, and sprinkled rose water on her thin shoulders to hide the scent of her fear. Outside, the villagers cheered, blind to what they were celebrating. A new alliance, yes, but one paid for with a child's trembling flesh. When the doors closed behind her, Isabel saw the great bed carved with hunting scenes of boars and wolves devouring stags. A woman of the household tried to whisper comfort, but the words felt dry and dead, blown away by the rising wind. Then Lord Brennick entered, all steel and wine and the pride of too many victories, and his smile was that of a man who had conquered a new city. She was nothing to him but a treaty-given breath. His hands were calloused and heavy, gripping her as if she were already half stone, and though she wept and begged, he did not pause. The candles flickered as the shadows turned monstrous, swallowing her screams until they became only another sound among countless ghosts in those walls. By morning, Isabel was so weak she could not stand. Blood pooled beneath her where she lay, and when the midwife came, she crossed herself and turned away, for there was nothing to be done. Isabel lived 3 days in agony, fevered and torn apart, while Lord Brennick boasted in the hall that his bride was so delicate she could not survive a real man's love. The knights laughed, drinking to his virility, while above their heads Isabel lay dying, her small hands twisting in sheets stained rust brown. When the priest arrived, he found no words to soothe her. Isabel tried to ask if God would let her mother hold her again, but her breath rattled and failed. She died alone, a child in a stranger's bed, her prayers unanswered, her body a monument to a peace that had never existed. No one dared blame Lord Brennick, for he was too powerful, and the Count could not challenge him without sacrificing what remained of his lands. So Isabel was buried with honors, a white wreath upon her brow, as if purity could matter in a grave. The castle carried on, ready for the next bride, the next sacrifice, the next doomed hope. This was the pattern of medieval marriage hidden behind the perfume and the hymns. Girls no older than spring flowers, gifted like trinkets to men who understood only, were used up and left to rot if they failed to bear sons. And all the while, the church turned its face away, preaching obedience, preaching God's will, as if the Almighty had ever demanded such cruelty in His name. Among the midwives, tales grew, stories of girls who fought back, who bit and scratched and tore at their husbands until death took them first, choosing a quick grave over the slow horror of a wedding bed. They became whispered heroines, saints of resistance, their names lost to history, but not to the women who carried on after them. And sometimes a bride would run before the marriage was sealed, vanishing into the woods or the night roads, risking wolves and outlaws rather than the worst monsters waiting beneath the Lord's crest. If they were caught, they died. If they were not, they were forgotten. Better a ghost than a bride. The pattern did not change. And still each year new girls were led down candlelit aisles, their smiles sewn into place like embroidery, walking toward a wedding night that was nothing but a ritual of blood. They dreamed of love, perhaps, of gentle hands and kind voices, but dreams are soft things, easily torn. The world they were given was hard, built of iron and stone, and laws written by men who saw them as chattel. So they stepped through those carved doors, each one thinking maybe she would be the lucky one, maybe she would survive. Most did not, and when they died, the same priests who blessed their marriages would bless their graves, speaking of virtue and heaven and God's mysterious plans. But among the serving women, among the mothers who still remembered the pain of their own wedding night, another truth was known. There was nothing holy in that death, nothing divine in a child's broken body, only the same old hunger, the same cold greed, wearing a wedding crown. In a crumbling keep farther north, where the wind shrieked through arrow slits like mourning ghosts, there lived another girl whose name the chronicles barely remembered. They called her Eleanor, born of a petty baron's line, traded away as casually as one might sell a winter lamb. Eleanor was 14 when they led her through iron gates hung with black banners, for her new husband was a widower twice over, eager to prove his virility by wedding yet another child. Rumor said both his earlier brides had died within a week of the wedding bed, but no one spoke of it openly. To question a lord was to invite the rope. Eleanor was small, pale as candle wax, with eyes too big for her hollow face, and she tried to comfort herself that at least she would bring peace to her father's lands. But peace is a lie told to girls like a lullaby. The lord who took her to wife was a man steeped in violence, raised on campaign after campaign until he saw softness only as a failing to be corrected. When he looked at Eleanor, he saw not a child, but a vessel to carry his heir, nothing more. And so the first night he came to her, reeking of spiced wine and sweat, he cared nothing for her terror. He pressed her to silken sheets as though they were a battlefield, conquering rather than touching, breaking rather than loving. Eleanor tried to pray, but the words tangled in her throat, drowned by the roar of her own pain. She bled, of course, as they all did, but he was not satisfied. When she fainted from agony, he woke her with a slap, commanding her to continue as if she were a war horse refusing the bit. By dawn, her fragile body had given way, torn beyond repair, and the midwives whispered behind their hands that she would never bear a child again, though they dared not say so aloud. The Lord, enraged by what he saw as her weakness, left her to rot in a fevered haze, refusing even the simplest broth to sustain her. Eleanor died by nightfall, delirious with infection, calling for a mother who could not come. Her body was interred in the family crypt without prayers, for the Lord could not bear to acknowledge his failure. Within a month he took another bride, and so the cycle spun on. Generation after generation, girls stolen from hearth and cradle promised to men who thought a wedding was a blood oath, not a joining of souls. Each bride believed, for a brief shining moment, that she might survive where the others had fallen, that she might be the one to soften a cruel husband's heart to teach him tenderness. But tenderness was not bred into these men. Their mothers had never dared to show it, their fathers had beaten it out of them. And so they repeated the only language they knew, violence, cold as winter steel. Sometimes a girl might live long enough to carry a child, but the cost was monstrous. Bones broken in childbirth, bodies ravaged by infection, hearts scarred beyond repair. And if she failed to deliver a healthy son, her life was worth nothing. There were whispered tales of queens who could not bear sons and so were put aside, locked away in towers to wither like neglected flowers or worse, quietly smothered so their husbands could try again with a new bride. Their children, if girls, would be sent on the same road, dressed in ribbons and prayers, leading lambs to slaughter. These were not tales of evil witches or curses, but of a system that devoured its daughters as surely as wolves devour stray sheep. And no knight in shining armor came to rescue them, for the knights were the worst of all, trained from boyhood to believe a woman was a prize for their valor, a mark of their power, not a soul equal to their own. Eleanor's name faded from the family records, replaced by a line reading only, "The bride who died young." As though her dreams, her laughter, her terror had never mattered. But somewhere, perhaps in a village hearth where women spoke softly over mending work, her story was told in a hush, a warning to other girls to run if they could, to hide if they could not. And so those hidden histories endured, the unspoken sisterhood, carried in lamplight and lullabies, stories of girls who had suffered so others might learn to fight back. The stone churches and the Lord's chronicles never recorded those voices, but they survived, fluttering like candle flames in the dark, refusing to be snuffed out. For every Eleanor, every Isabel, every Mariette, there were women who remembered, women who taught their daughters to fear the red banners and the gilded promises, to look past the silks and see the trap laid out for them. Yet the trap was patient, cunning, and powerful. Each spring, new girls were led to slaughter, new alliances forged on their broken backs, new fathers eager to trade away their child's life for land and security. And always the priest blessed it, voices droning in Latin while a girl's heartbeat rattled like a dying bird. The wedding night was the hidden graveyard of 1,000 innocent children, dressed in white, crowned with flowers, never knowing the bed they lay in would become their shroud. In the villages, mothers tried to warn their daughters in secret, sewing charms into their hems, whispering the names of herbs that might slow the bleeding or ease the pain if no mercy could be found in the wedding bed. They taught them how to pray, but not to trust that prayers alone would save them. Sometimes they taught them how to run, how to hide in the forests among thorn and briar, even though the punishment for fleeing a marriage was worse than death itself. These were the small rebellions, hidden under veils and quiet terrors, a spark of resistance passed from woman to woman. Still, most were too young, too hopeful, too desperate to please. They went to their weddings like lambs to an altar, believing the priests who told them obedience was their salvation, that suffering was their holy duty. So they stepped through the carved doors, pale hands trembling, breathing in the scent of rosemary and candle wax, never imagining that the same hands blessing them might one day bury them. The lords and princes saw none of this. To them, the wedding night was proof of their might, their right to conquer, to break and bend a bride to their will. They knew nothing of fear, nothing of a girl's terror, nothing of the silence that followed the moment her body gave way. When the child brides died, their deaths were woven into songs and stories that made them martyrs, praising their virtue instead of naming the true cause of their end. They called it fate, or God's will, or even romance, spinning tales of tragic young queens who gave their lives for their kingdoms. But there was nothing divine about the torn flesh, nothing holy in the fevered cries echoing through shuttered chambers. There was only horror dressed in brocade, cruelty passed down like a family heirloom. And no matter how many girls bled to death, the ritual never changed. Each generation performed it again, as if trying to appease a god who demanded innocence as a sacrifice. The castles stood tall and proud, their flags snapping in cold winds, while inside, girl after girl was crushed beneath ancient laws no one dared break. Yet sometimes, if the night was very still, you might hear a different story told around a village fire, the truth, soft as a mother's lullaby, fierce as a wolf's snarl. There, women spoke of how the world had been built on their broken backs, how their daughters would inherit the same chains unless something changed. These women remembered the girls who had died. They said their names, Mariette, Isabel, Eleanor. They kept those names alive, refusing to let them vanish behind stone walls and holy lies. And they promised each other that one day, their daughters would not be given away like cattle. That one day, the red banners would fall. That one day, no girl would have to pray to survive her wedding night. It was a small hope, but it burned stubbornly, hidden in the hearts of women who had learned to survive in silence. The lords never saw it, the priests never blessed it. But the spark waited, passed from hand to hand, until the time would come to set the whole cruel world alight. And in the meantime, the stories continued, because stories are stronger than walls, stronger than swords. Stories remember when no one else will. They hold the truth in their teeth like a mother holding her child, refusing to let go. So the candles burned down, the silk rotted on cold bodies, and another bride stepped into another wedding bed. But somewhere, far away, a little girl learned not to trust the smile of a man who spoke of alliances. She learned to run before the door shut. She learned to hide the knife under a pillow. And maybe, just maybe, she would be the one who lived.